Hello, greetings, beloveds, brothers and sisters around the world. This is Chrissy B, Chrissy Manuel Bailey, but better known around the world as Chrissy B, DJ, writer, presenter, radio presenter, historian, music journalist, music commentator, and just lover of humanity, but especially my African Nubian Melanites, of course. Yeah, today's a day, the 26th of May, 2018. We've got about 6:30 in the evening. I'm about to watch the Champions League final, even though my team is Arsenal, but I'm interested to see what Liverpool are going to do against Real Madrid. But we're here really, brothers and sisters, to talk about reggae music, because this is the 50th anniversary of reggae music, because reggae music started in 1968, and now it's 2018, so it's 50 years, so it's half a century. And before reggae, some people have asked me, so what was ska, what was rocksteady, and so on and so forth. Reggae music started in Jamaica, but before reggae music there was a beat called a rocksteady beat, which was a slower pace of music. And reggae music came out of rocksteady in 1968. There's three contenders for the songs that really kicked off reggae. One of those songs was Larry Marshall and Alvin Leslie, better known as Larry and Alvin, at Studio One, Jamaica's premier record studio and record label. Jamaica's answer really to Tamla Motown in America. Coxon Dodd was the founder of that label, and Larry and Alvin had a big hit in 1968 with Nanny Goat. And some commentators have said that was the very first time that was the reggae. We heard of reggae, what was called a reggae sound, because a reggae is dominated by the organ. The do 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 do. It's a quirky sound, it's a jerky sound, and it was very popular over here in the 60s with the skinheads and the mods. They embraced that type of music. It's seen as a rebel music as well, but it became more rebelized in the 70s when the Rastas took it up, and people like Bob Marley, Burning Spear, people like Dennis Brown, Ori Sandy, Leroy Smart, etc., Greg Isaacs took this new music on and turned it into sufferers music, and to talk about the people of the ghettos in Jamaica and around the world for that matter, and to talk about poor peoples. But in actual fact, as I don't want to sort of like digress, but before rocksteady we had ska. According to Bonnie Lee, one of the greatest producers in the whole history of Jamaican music, ska music really gave reggae music its base, gave Jamaican music its platform. Because according to Bonnie Lee, he says that without ska music there'd be no reggae music, and that is so true, because with ska it was more of an up-tempo thing, because for Jamaicans tried to copy their counterparts in America, people like Smiley Lewis, Louis Jordan, Louis Prima, Fats Domino, and so on and so forth, Professor Longhair, and people like Rose. And this came about with the sound system culture, which started off in the late 1940s, where you had people like Coxon Dodd, who I mentioned before, who was one of the first producers on the island, people like Drew Creed, another one of the pioneering producers, people like King Edwards, the Giant. They all had sound systems, but they all went to America, Miami and Florida, on farm work to pick up the latest records. When I say farm work, the Jamaican government are given Jamaicans permission to go out to America, to go to Florida and to go to New York on farm work, to work on the fields, so to pick fruits and veg and so on and so forth. For what these Jamaicans did, they use it as an excuse to go and pick up the latest records. So what we're talking about here is that the producers, like as I mentioned before, Drew Creek, Coxon, King Edwards, etc., went to America to pick up the latest records, to bring them up and play on the sound system in Jamaica for the listeners and for the public to get a gauge of what was going on in America. Because at that time, Jamaica never had a music industry. Jamaica would just listen to a radio station called WINZ, which is WINZ, WINZ. They were based in Miami, New Orleans, and for Jamaicans being so close to Miami and New Orleans, was able to pick it up through the transmission, through the airwaves, and was able to listen to it. Also, you had another station, you had the BBC World Service around at that time, but the one station that the Jamaicans mostly listened to was the WINZ, because they carried a lot of R&B songs, they played a lot of R&B songs, and jump blues and jazz and that sort of thing, even gospel music and pop music. So the Jamaicans were getting a wonderful dosage of what was going on, especially in America, but also in the UK and much parts of the world. And because at that time, as I said, the industry wasn't civilized yet. It hadn't gotten off the ground. So this gave the Jamaicans the impetus and the drive and the inspiration to want to try to hand, making their own recordings. And this is where Coxsone Dodd and Duke Reid and Prince Buster, these are the early producers. Lyndon Pottinger was the first black man to own his own studio. The husband of the late and great, recently passed away, Sonia Pottinger, one of the first female producers in Jamaica. And so this gave the Jamaicans a wonderful platform to gauge how to sing songs, what songs to sing, and how to write their own songs and make their own interpretation of the songs they're hearing and wins, obviously via the great R&B and jazz men in America, you see. But reggae music had its own beat. Like I said, it's people like, because the Scatolites were prominent, the foremost ska band, which really got their big break at places like Studio One, and also for Top Net Records in the 60s, and also for Duke Reid. And actually, Scatolites were really the foremost ska band, and they had to freelance from producers to producers, from studios to studios, and had to sometimes change their name to a different alias, because they were under contract to certain studios, and especially Studio One, because really Studio One, they were really Studio One's property. But because they had to make money and they couldn't stay in one studio and one label for so long, they had to move around and go and branch out and record for Duke Reid, Prince Buster. But they did this sometimes under different names. And what they would do, they would go by the band leader's name. So for example, the core of the Scatolites was Tommy McCook, Wallen Alfonso and Don Drummond. Tommy McCook was a saxophonist, Don Drummond was a trombonist, and of course Wallen Alfonso was a tenor saxophonist. So they had to sometimes go by the name of the leader. So for example, they'll be called the Wallen Alfonso band, or Wallen Alfonso and his band, or Tommy McCook and his band, or Don Drummond and his band, etc., etc. So as to sort of disguise the name. But we all know it was the Scatolites, because the Scatolites had a distinctive tone and a distinctive sound, and only they can conjure up such a sound like that. So they were kidding anybody. So basically, but reggae music came out from people like Jackie Jackson, who was part of the Supersonics. The Supersonics were one incarnation of the Scatolites, because what happened was Don Drummond had demise. He killed his common law wife in New Year's Day of 1965, and after that he became mentally ill, mentally disturbed. So he left the Scatolites in 65, went to Bellevue, which was a mental institution, and he was there until 1968, 69 when he died. You see, and then what happened was, because of Don John was a stalwart in the Scatolites. He was a linchpin, so to speak. Without him, the Scatolites didn't have that distinctive tone and that distinctive sound. So as a result, people like Tommy McCook, they had to leave and go and form another band, and they left Studio One and went to Duke Reid's Treasure Isle Studios and formed the Supersonics, and this time featuring Jackie Jackson on bass. And Jackie Jackson's bass is off the lick. He's one of the best bass players of all time in Jamaican music, probably of all music. And he's one of the main reasons why we had the reggae sound, because it was his bass lines what played on some of those early reggae songs. As I said to you, you also had at Studio One the Soul Vendors, which came out from the Scatolites, another division of the Scatolites. So they disbanded because of Don Drummond's demise, because without Don Drummond they couldn't carry on. And so you had the Soul Brothers, who was really the first incarnation of the Scatolites after they disbanded, you see. So after the Soul Brothers now, this is 65 going into 66, and you had the Soul Vendors, 1967 to 68. Then after 68 you had the Sound Dimension. Yeah. And some of the musicians in the Sound Dimension, that was the reggae period when it started in 68, were members of the Scatolites. You had people like Wally Cameron on bass. Wally Cameron is a very unsung hero in Jamaican music, but he played many great bass lines, Wally Cameron. You also had people like Jackie Mittoo, who they say was a creator of reggae, because he changed the organ signature and the organ sound and made it more upbeat and more jerky. And there was that ushered in a new sound, a new energy, which was called reggae. The word reggae came from a prostitute, because in Jamaica, Streggae is the name of a prostitute. And at first they were calling the music Streggae music, and somebody said, no, we can't call it Streggae music, we've got to call it reggae, and reggae just came off the cuff. And so the name sort of caught on and it sort of stuck. Before reggae it was called rocksteady, and before rocksteady it was called ska, and before ska it was R&B, when the Jamaicans were just starting to find their feet. This is around 1957, 58, coming out of America. Like I said to you before, of when they picked up the music in America and they brought the records back over to play in the sound system, the Jamaicans were trying to copy and imitate what they were hearing in America, but it went wrong, and then that's where ska came in. When it went wrong, and ska came in and corrected it, if you like, because they were trying to play the R&B stuff, and they were doing it. They got it right for about 3 years between the years of '58 and '61, but one day it went wrong, and then they said, okay, then we'll go with this. Let us make the mistake work for us. But that mistake turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because those ska records sound so generic and so authentic. And ska came about because of a guy called Dennis Ska Campbell. Dennis Ska Campbell was a great guitarist, and he played a particular note, and he was saying that let the guitar go ska ska ska, you see. And then that's where but some were saying it was Clue J. You had a band called Clue J and the Blues Blasters, which was really the great guitarist Ernest Ranglin's band. But Ernest Ranglin wasn't able to manage the band. He had to go uptown to play places like Montego Bay and so on, and places like Negril. So to juggle his gig and to juggle the band was a bit too much for him. So he gave the band to his friend, the bass player, called Clue Johnson, but they called him Clue J as a nickname. So Clue J took the band under his name as Clue J and the Blues Blasters, and they're playing R&B songs, the R&B numbers. One of the first bands really to get recorded in Jamaica, and some of the members of the Scatolites were in that band as well, like people like Roland Alfonso. Tommy McCook was in that band, and they branched out and then they formed the Scatolites in the very early 1960s. And like I said, reggae music has many subgenres. The first one was, of course, we call it spaghetti reggae, with the jerky sounds like I just demonstrated to you. Reggae, reggae, reggae. According to Bob Marley says that if you listen to it carefully, you can hear the words being whispered, reggae, in the afterbeat. Reggae, 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 and so on and so forth. It's a wonderful feeling. And after reggae, when I say it's still reggae, because everything was called reggae after that, everything came under the umbrella of reggae. Still called reggae, but it was called now, after the years of 68 to 71, that was early reggae when it first started, as I mentioned before. You had people like the Belltones at Harry J Studio. Belltones were one of the first group to sing reggae, a song in the new reggae sound called No More Heartaches. The Belltones, No More Heartaches. So along with Larry and Alvin's Nanny Goat in 68, the Belltones, No More Heartache, also the same year, 68, were one of the first contenders of being the first reggae song coming out of Rocksteady. Also another contender was Clancy Eccles, who was a great producer coming from the R&B days. A great producer. He sung a song called No Brag No Boast, where he coins the word reggae. But some say it was Toots and the Maytals, and Toots Hibbert sung a song called Do the Reggae in 1968 for Byron Lee. He coined the name of reggae for the very first time in a song. He says that one day him and his friends were jamming at home, and one of his friends said to him, "Come on, let's do the reggae." So the name just sort of stuck, but some were calling it reggae before that. But they said, "No, we're going to go with this new reggae sound. We're going to go with the word reggae, but it sounds more better. It sounds a lot more generic, and it sounds a lot more respectful rather than calling it reggae." Because of course, after all, reggae is the name for a derogatory name for a prostitute. So there you have it. So there, hopefully you've got a dosage of that. After the skank sounds of the early 70s, Jonko Skank was coined by the producer Bunny Lee, because at that time, because those were stop-start rhythms. Dun 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 dun. Dun 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 dun. Then you got a creep organ. Group 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 underneath all of that instrumentation. You listen to a song called Cherry Old Baby by the great Eric Donaldson. It gives you an example of what the sound was at that time. Harder They Come has that skanky sound with the creep organ going in the background. Also, Doppy Conquered by Bob Marley and the Wailers, or the Wailers, have that creep organ going in. All the songs from say 71 right up to 73 has that creep organ vibe to it. All producers, all labels has that creep organ going through it. One of these days I'll come here and play some of the songs and give you an example so you can actually hear it visually from the ear. After the Janko sounds of the early 1970s, you had another sound called the Flyers. That was going on for about a good year and a half, between 74 and 75. That came about because of the Philly sound in America. That was a disco sound, because the Jamaicans tended to imitate what they're hearing from America, because of course America being their biggest inspirations from the R&B days of the 50s, like I mentioned, with the sound system. So anything they were hearing in America, they tried to imitate it by using it, doing it in a reggae-matical fashion, and doing so they did a reggae disco vibe. You had people like Carlton Santa Davis, the drummer, Jenna Smith, the guitarist, and other people like that. The Aggravators, which was Bunny Lee's band in the 70s, they backed a lot of Johnny Clark numbers, and of course all the singers who were singing for Bunny Lee in that era got the flying cymbals treatment. They call it the flying cymbals or the flyers. Psst, 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 psst. Al Green had a band, and a lot of the musicians were copying that sound, that disco, because that was really the start of the disco sound, because that was 1974, so that's when disco was just coming in America, and that hi-hat sound was really kicking on all over the place, and a lot of those songs got to number one, like George McRae's Rocky Baby was the first disco number one in 1974. He had other songs, Rock the Boat by Hughes Corporation, and songs like that. So the Jamaicans were just imitating that and putting it into reggae, and it was just a wonderful lick, wonderful hybrid and a wonderful combination, you see. And then after that you had the flyer sound. Yeah, so you had the rocker sound, which is militant. We're updating the rock steady songs and rock steady rhythms from Studio One and from Treasure Isle, because those were the two premierest labels and studios. You also had Randy's, but Randy's was also big, but the mainstay was mostly Studio One, Coxsone and Drew Creek, Treasure Isle. Those were the studios, and those two were the two main prominent sounds in Jamaica from those two studios. And a lot of the musicians in the 70s, like Sly and the Revolutionaries, were copying from those two particular studios. Channel 1 as well was popular. Joe Gibbs' studio, a retirement Crescent in Kingston. Channel 1, Kingston 16 as well. They were copying that as well. They were copying that wonderful sound, and so they're updating it in their own studios, in the retirement Crescent Joe Gibbs studios, and in the Channel 1 studios as well. And all the other producers at that time, the 70s, were doing. But some people didn't always copy Studio 1 and Treasure Isle. They did their own thing. But going back in time, in the ska days and in the rock steady, especially the rock steady days and the early reggae days, that's what they were copying, those old rhythms from that time, from especially Studio One and Treasure Isle. And then you had the dancehall thing. Dancehall really started out in 1978 with people like Sugar Minott. Sugar Minott was really the pioneer of dancehall, because what he was doing, he was recording new current songs over old rhythms. So he took Studio One's rhythms, and like he would take a popular song from Studio One and they would take away the vocals, and he would sing his own interpretation of the song using the same rhythm, but just recycled. And that went out in the tree. And then people like Johnny Osborne copied it, that formula. Coxsone was really reluctant at first to do it, but he convinced Coxsone to let him use the old rhythms when he was at Studio One as a singer, Sugar Minott. And Coxsone reluctantly let him do it and said, okay then, we'll do this. And then it worked out a treat. And his first album, Live Lovin' for Studio One, was really the go-to album for dancehall. Also, you had Johnny Osborne, Truth and Rights. He did the same sort of thing, updating his own songs, using older rhythms, and then Freddie Mercury did in his Babylon album, doing the same thing. And those guys came around the same time, you see. But Johnny Osborne was singing a lot before that. He was singing from in the late 60s with the Attractions and with the Sensation, but he had to go to Canada because he couldn't get enough work in Jamaica. He went to Canada for a number of years, and he came back and done the Truth and Rights album and started with people like Jammies, King Jammies, and so on. Sugar Minott was there with the Africa Brothers before working for Rupie Edwards, and then he branched out, and Coxsone liked him so much that he let him stay at the studio and made him make songs, made him make recordings, and then the album came along, Live Lovin'. And Freddie McGregor was there with the Caledonians in the 60s, with Ernest Wilson and Peter Austin, and then he branched away, worked for people like 90 and some, but he was always at Studio One because Coxsone loved him so much, loved his voice, loved his attitude, so he gave him great encouragement to make songs and make recordings, you see. And there you have it, dancehall. So that's basis of dancehall, but you also have dancehall which became digitalized in the 80s with people like Jammies, when he used computerized rhythms. Rain Smith under Massenting in 1985 was one of the first examples of digitalized reggae, probably the first. But you also had Heart and Stone by the Viceroys, which was produced by Silent Robbie in the early 80s as well, 81 or thereabouts, you know. And you had some more as well, some more numbers along those lines. But and he had people like Tenor Soul done Ring the Alarm, one of the first dancehall smashes. But Ring the Alarm wasn't really a digitalized rhythm. It was using the old Stalag 17 rhythm by the techniques, coming all the way back from the 70s. Winston Riley gave Tenor Soul, very young Tenor Soul, the rhythm to handle. And he did it with 10 in effect. He did an absolute 10 effect, and that's one of the biggest numbers in dancehall. I must say before I go, I want to say a big shout out to Sugar Minott, whose birthday would have been today. He would have been 62 years of age today. He sadly passed away in 2010, and one of these days we'll come along and do a little tribute to Sugar Minott. If we could play some songs of his, talk about him, that would be really, really good. And we'll try and do that one day, but today is a day that we have to really remember Sugar Minott, and we'll say thanks very much for your participation. Like I said though, reggae, so many stars have come out of reggae. Sugar Minott, one of them, Dennis Brown, John Holt. And even though John Holt was singing before reggae, still he was one of the stars in the reggae period. People like Alton and this was singing before that as well. Leroy Smart, Bunny Wailer, the Wailers, Bob Marley, Peter Tosh. A lot of these guys were singing from the ska days, but in the reggae period they were still very popular. They just adjusted themselves and thought it was the current trend. So they were singing in ska, they were singing in the rocksteady, they were singing in reggae, all the umbrellas of reggae, skank, flyers, rockers, steppers. I forgot to mention steppers. Steppers came after the rockers. Steppers was the militant sound, militant drumming. Sly and Robbie, Channel 1, the Revolutionaries. Also, you also had the Professionals at Joe Gibbs' studio, which was really the same group, led by Sly Dunbar. Robbie Shakespeare was in there somewhere in the bass. Then when they went to Channel 1, they changed their names to Revolutions. Like I said, it was a contractual reason, so they had to change their name and change their alias from one name to another. The Scatterers did the same thing in the 60s, when sometimes they were called by like I mentioned before, their leaders band and other names. You know, there's some groups at studio were called Underground Vegetables, but some of them were really the sound I mentioned, or the Soul Defenders, which were really the bands which were popular in the early 70s when the skank sound came along. And the music that come out of the early reggae jerky sounds went into a much more relaxed skank sound, you see, with the flying, with the Jonko skank sound, with the creep organ going along. So when I mentioned some more names, Marcia Griffiths, Judy Marrett, all of these are stars of reggae in the reggae period. Judy Marrett, I mentioned Rita Marley, people like Cynthia Shosh, people like what's her name again? People like Jennifer Lara, Doreen Schaefer, some of the ladies have to get mentioned. Carleen Davis, people like, as I mentioned, Barry Brown, Darrington Levy. These are dancehall singers, but still reggae, because as I said, dancehall is an umbrella of reggae. Reggae comes on many subgenres, and that's just one of them there. So once again, brothers and sisters, we thank you so much. We're going to come again and do a second part to this. You look after yourselves, you take care, and thanks for listening. Adios. Bye for now.